First, let's review the directory structure that we have. In the Hello World application, we have a data folder, a log, and the validation. And then in top folder, we have a config file and also a connector. Let's start from the config file. All the configurations of the application are here. For example, you can see the logging section. The level of logging is now set to the info. It could be debug or other variables. And also, for example, for the reporting, you can see we are putting the reporting and the test in the validation folder. This is the validation folder here. And also the connector for the Git will be in the top folder. And this is the connector that I have. When I click on the connector, we're using this JSON file to connect to a provider. For example, in this case, it's a file system. The file system could be a local file on your computer, or it could be a remote Git. In this case, I'm connecting to a Git repository, Prancer hello world.git, and the branch name is master. So framework, when we start the Prancer framework, first it read the connected JSON file to see which provider we want to connect to. In our case, we want to connect to a Git provider with this address. In the data folder, I put the JSON file as the data. For example, we have a web server running on port 443, and we have another web server running on the port 80. These are the JSON file in my Git repository. I'm using them as a data, but you can connect to a cloud provider, for example, AWS, and then get the information, the attributes of a web server from a cloud provider rather than connecting to a local file system. But for simplicity here, we just put the data here on the data folder. And under the validation, you can see we have two subfolders, and these subfolders, we are calling them container in Prancer framework, and they contain the snapshot and the test file. We have a snapshot configuration file, and here we are mentioning from our data files which sections are important for us and we want to capture them. In this case, you can see the file type is a snapshot. We are using the connector to connect to the Git, and I want to read the JSON file, and this is the path to the JSON file, the same path under the data. This is the scenario fail. We have the same snapshot file in the scenario path, and you can see we are using the same connector. We want to read the JSON file, and the path is data resource path.json, the same folder. By using this snapshot configuration file, we are telling Prancer framework what type of information we need to capture from an API provider. And we have a test file. In this test file, after we capture the snapshot, we can run tests based on those snapshots. For example, here I'm mentioning I have a test ID number 1, and the rule is snapshot ID number 1 web server port should be 80. And you can see in my scenario pass, the port is 80, and in my scenario fail, the port is 443. So the first one will pass and the second one will fail. Now I will run the framework here. So I will call Prancer scenario pass. I can see the run stat, and under scenario pass folder, I can see an output file generated. And in this output file, I have some information like the timestamp that we run this file, and it's from the scenario pass container. And in the result, I can see it is passed and some details about the snapshot that we used, and also the test that's being evaluated on that snapshot. And since the web server port was 80, so the test is passed now. Now I run the framework one more time, but this one I will test scenario fail. And again, under my scenario fail folder, I can see an output, and this time the output, the result is failed. And I'm testing the same rule for my test, port 80, but because the port was 443 for this resource, you can see that my test result is failed. Also, under each container here, under the fail and pass container, I can see there's a new folder called snapshots, and Prancer framework automatically, based on the data that we want to use, take a snapshot and store it in this folder. And you can see the data. There is a JSON section. We have the same data as our JSON file, but we have some attributes as a top level attributes in the JSON file. For example, the timestamp that we run this snapshot, the path, and also the checksum of the file that we run to test. Again, under the scenario fail, also I have the snapshot, but this time from the other file, from the resource-fail. And you can see the detail of the resource here. In this example, in this hello world example, for simplicity, I have set the database to none in the configuration file, and it means that we are reading all the files like the snapshot configuration file, the test file from the file system, and also writing the files like the snapshots and output to the file system. But it's possible to change this database to a full attribute, and it means that everything will be read and will be written back to the database. But now for simplicity, we just put a none, so we use file system to understand what's happening under the hood.